Good evening. Today is May 6th, and we are having a regular work session this evening. The time is 5:31, and we are going to start with Mr. Brian McCain, Chief of Staff from the Mayor's Office.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few updates tonight. First, I want to remind everybody that the Team Up to Cleanup is Saturday, May 18th. Team Up to Cleanup, can't talk, sorry. For City of Pueblo residents a no cost and convenient opportunity to dispose of household items and yard debris. This is limited to Pueblo City residents only. 2 locations, CSU Pueblo and Colorado State Fair, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. They will accept furniture, mattresses, and excess carpet, yard waste that's in a bag or box, and you could bring tires up to 5 without the rims. And then also free energy efficiency weatherization kits from Black Hills Energy will be made available. There are applications for the following boards and commissions that are due on Monday, May 20th. Housing Authority Board of Directors, Retail and Medical Marijuana Licensing Authority, Pueblo Conservancy District, and the Pueblo Regional Building Boards of Appeals. And then I would like to introduce Renee Martinez, our new director of the Just Transitions Program. Renee, she's back here. Today was her first day, so go easy on her. Renee is a Pueblo native, a graduate of CSU Pueblo and CSU Fort Collins. She most recently worked for U.S. Senator Michael Bennet as regional director in the Pueblo office. She worked for the U.S. Census Bureau as a partnership specialist leading up to and after the 2020 census. She also worked for PCAP, Chemical Depot, as a community outreach specialist. She's an animal lover. She enjoys music, decorating, and gardening. And that concludes my updates.
Great, thank you. And next, we're going to have our lobbyist and his associates tonight, Mr. Gil Romero. Hi, Mr. Romero. How are you?
Good evening.
Sorry for the struggle. Well,
Okay.
can't hear from you. You must be muted.
I thought I'm not muted.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're good on my end, Gil.
Huh. You're-
I think they're having technical difficulties though.
Pardon?
That's just from
Can someone say
I
something?
can hear you,
Is
Gil.
that you,
This is
Alec?
Novak.
Okay.
Alec, can you say something to say?
Novak is talking, so it's a problem with our.
Hello.
Okay,
Good evening.
sorry, it's our problem. We're trying to get it fixed now.
Okay.
Last couple days of session though, Romero's.
That's right.
Woohoo!
Yeah, 118th day of the session.
Are you ready for it to be done?
Yes, but we still have
Almost,
we have,
almost.
yeah, we have some stuff that we're still
Okay,
ready
great.
to go.
Yes, we're ready to go.
Okay,
Sorry
thank you.
about that.
That's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see everyone this evening. I know it's only been 2 weeks, but we have a lot to cover with you. Good evening, Mayor Graham, President Aliff, and members of City Council. We are in the 118th day of the 120-day session. There's still over 200 bills pending with 3 days to go. We almost finished Monday, but there's still meeting at the Capitol this evening. They worked over the weekend. The House met Saturday and Sunday. They did move a lot of legislation. Just to give you a brief overview, but to talk to you about some significant successes since we talked to you 2 weeks ago. First, just to let you know that property tax legislation was introduced today, which is a good thing because we thought they would not be able to introduce it in time, and we were under the impression that we'd probably be back here in a month or so for a special session. So it looks like they have an agreement with the governor and interested stakeholders, including municipalities and counties, and so it looks like that bill hopefully will make it across the finish line by Wednesday evening late. One bill that we followed a number of gun bills for the city. The city didn't take positions on them, but just to let you know in case you get asked by constituents, the assault weapons bill, which passed out of the house, which is the first time the assault weapon is actually passed out of one house, was killed by the sponsor today, Senator Gonzalez. So that assault weapons ban will not advance this year in the legislature. One of the bills that we were following really late for you that was introduced 2 weeks ago, House Bill 1460, the police misconduct bill. I wanted to spend at least a couple of minutes on this bill because I think the city really had a significant amount of influence on this bill, and our chief of police testified on this bill. This bill passed on second reading. The things that I think really cause concern for law enforcement is that it was introduced so late and there was absolutely no stakeholdering done on this bill. This really came as a result of an incident that happened with Edgewater City Police and two of its officers who were dismissed for making allegations against fellow officers. And so the legislature and Representative Bacon decided to introduce the bill without any stakeholdering. There was obviously a significant amount of concern with the bill. The mayor wrote a letter, city council expressed opposition to it. When it got to second reading, they had really retreated from their original positions on the bill, including the whistleblowing component of the bill, whistleblower component of the bill, and really turned it into a task force. And the bill passed on second reading. And this is where I think really, I think the city had such a significant influence is that I know that the chief had talked to members of the Pueblo delegation, but we got a call from Sandra Solon, who represents the chiefs, and she said, could you really go back and solidify no votes for Representative Morrow, Representative Martinez, and Representative Luck? The bill passed on second reading. Usually, if it passes on second reading, the chances the probability is it will pass on third reading. And when we got the call after it passed on second reading, we went back. We spoke to Representative Martinez and Representative Morrow. They became solid no votes along with Representative Luck. And very unusual. In my 14 years in the legislature, I saw very few bills get defeated on third reading, but the police misconduct bill was defeated on third reading. So that bill is done for this year, but we'll obviously see some form of that bill next year. But it really had to do with the influence. Several of the legislators expressed appreciation for the letters that were written by city council and the mayor. The other significant success and it's something we've been working on for months, was Senate Bill 166. This was the top priority for EVRAZ. It was the #1 bill that they thought would impact their ability to continue their work in Pueblo. This was the air quality enforcement bill that really put in punitive measures and strict enforcement for repeated violators. That bill was successfully killed. And I think there was really a collaboration of a number of entities, including the city and Pueblo leaders, the chamber, Action Colorado, a number of folks here in Southern Colorado that made a huge difference with the governor. As a result of Senate Bill 166 being defeated, the governor, who had been negotiating for months on something that would be more amenable and less punitive in terms of reducing ozone levels, a package of 2 bills were introduced this past week, Senate Bill 229 and 230. 229 directs the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to propose rules for the state's Air Quality Control Commission to reduce oxides of nitrogen, NOx, generated by the oil and gas industry in ozone non-attainment areas by 50% of the 2017 baseline in the next 6 years. Additionally, the bill removes certain restrictions on injunctions in environmental enforcement actions, grants authority to the Energy and Carbon Management Commission to revoke licenses and suspend permits for serious violations. As you'll recall, in Senate Bill 166, there was a private right of action, which really caused concern for Evraz. That was removed in the bill that went forward and passed today. So Senate Bill 229 is on its way to the governor. The other bill it was the companion bill, and I think it will have impact on Pueblo as well. Senate Bill 230. It imposes new fees on oil and gas operators based on average oil and gas spot prices. The fees, which would help fund the state's passenger rail and public transportation initiatives, are predicted to generate $110 million in 2025-26 fiscal year, according to the bill's fiscal analysis. And just to put this in perspective, Colorado is 44th in providing funds from the state for mass transit. So this will make a huge difference. The other portion of the bill also adds some funds for state parks. I'm trying to find it. Let me see. I'll find it in my notes and get back to you, but they're additional, but the majority of that fee on oil and gas will go for mass transit, and certainly that's obviously something that the governor was trying to do in this year's package of bills, including a tax that was going to go on rental cars that would have generated about 44 million, not nearly what you're going to need to provide rail and the other portions of the package. So those were the significant things, and I'm going to turn it over to Alec to talk to you about some of the other bills that were top priorities for the city.
Okay, thanks, Gil. So good evening, members of council. A few updates on some of the bills we've been following for you all. House Bill 24-1237, programs for the development of childcare facilities. This is a bill the city chose to get behind and support. It passed both chambers with great bipartisan support. So now it's headed to the governor's desk. House Bill 24-1304, minimum parking requirements. This bill passed the Senate. It has to return to the House for concurrence of Senate amendments. And the House sponsors have already indicated that they will concur with these Senate amendments. So originally the bill completely prohibited enforcement of parking minimums. So now the bill was amended to apply only in areas along transit corridors, specifically within a quarter mile of fixed transit stops. So the bill now prohibits municipalities from enacting or enforcing these minimum parking requirements for most multifamily residential properties within an MPO that are within this quarter mile transit stop. The amendments that were added in the Senate also allow local governments to require minimum parking on certain developments subject to justification. The Department of Local Affairs is tasked with designating these applicable transit areas with a map to be published by September 2024. House Bill 24-1311, Family Affordability Tax Credit. This bill passed second reading in the Senate today with one more hurdle tomorrow in its third reading. This is the bill that introduces a family affordability income tax credit for individuals with children. The credits amount vary based on the child's age and the filer's income, with adjustments made for higher income brackets. Senate Bill 24-28, Tabor refund mechanisms. This is a bipartisan bill that was introduced late last week as a result of negotiations with the governor regarding an income tax cut and how that will interplay with a large number of tax credit proposals currently in the legislature. So especially the child care tax credit, which has about a $700 million impact on the Tabor refund. This bill adjusts mechanisms for refunding the Tabor surplus. It reinstates a temporary state income tax cut, and it introduces a new refund mechanism, a temporary reduction in the state sales and use tax rate. Income tax rate reductions and sales tax rate reductions are triggered by these surpluses, with larger surpluses resulting in larger cuts. So for the current fiscal year, with an anticipated surplus of about $2 billion, 0.515 percentage point reduction in the income tax rate will take it down to 4.25% for property tax year 2024. This reduction would also apply to the sales tax rate, bringing it down to 2.77%. As Gil mentioned, Senate Bill 24-233, property tax. This bill was introduced today. It has strong bipartisan support as a result of negotiations that took place over this weekend. The bill is expected to move quickly through the process before adjournment on Wednesday. Essentially, it reduces valuations for residential and commercial property taxation starting from the 2024 property tax year. Additionally, it implements separate reductions affecting schools and local government entities beginning in the 2025 property tax year. And it also introduces a local revenue growth limit that could be waived with voter approval. So I'll just walk you through some of the details real quickly. It maintains rate reductions and value exemption from 2023 to property tax 2024. And then starting in 2025, the separate assessment rates would be implemented for schools and local governments, with a higher rate for schools. And then for local governments, the residential assessment rate would be set at 6.7% in 2025 and 6.95% in 2026 onwards, with a 10% exemption from taxation on property values up to $70,000. For schools, the residential assessment rate would be fixed at 7.15% with no value exemption. Commercial rates for both local governments and schools would be set at 27% in 2025 and then reduced to 25% in 2026. As I mentioned, it institutes a new revenue growth cap for local governments, and this will be set at 5.5%. And it also includes a property tax, an expansion of the property tax deferral program. So starting in 2025, the 4% cap is removed. So now homeowners can defer taxes that increase by more than 4% from the average of the previous 2 years. Lastly, the ADU bill will be heard on third reading in the Senate this evening. We will be keeping a close eye on this one. That's all for me tonight. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
And Madam Chair, just to clarify, that's a lot of information, especially on the property tax stuff. We promise that we will get you a shortened version of that once the bill makes it through the process, and much easier for you to talk to your constituents. If you have town hall meetings, we'll try to get that into a condensed version that will have the most important components of that. And then just lastly, just to clarify my remarks on Senate Bill 230 regarding the fees for oil and gas. The other piece of that fee was for wildlife and land remediation. And with that, that concludes our report, and happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Romero. Any questions from council? Councilor Flores?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gil, I think I want to move up to the Senate Bill 166. That's been killed, but then the two bills that were introduced to deal with their equality, 229 and 230, you used the term oil and gas. Does that mean that that's what those two bills are just focused on, and that Alvarez is outside of that line of fire, or does that include Alvarez?
No, and a good point, Councilor Flores. We were there the day that they killed Senate Bill 166, And that really removed the most significant threat was Senate Bill 166. This package of bills really took them out, took manufacturing out of the equation. And I think for Pueblo leaders, the chamber, that was a relief. And that was part of that negotiation, is that Evraz and other manufacturers were really helped by, you know, the pressure that oil and gas was able to bring to bear on trying to put together, because these two bills actually represent 4 bills that were going through the legislature. And so these bills do not have any impact on Evraz.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, Counselor Martinez, did you have any questions?
No, a couple days left, Romero's. So good work.
Well, we're going to try to get those childcare bills across the finish line. Again, thank you to the mayor and council for the collaboration and the work on getting us positions on bills with the Colorado Municipal League. CML really appreciated the city's effort. The one thing that I wanted to discuss with you, Madam Chair, is that we'd like to come back to do a live presentation, and we were hoping that you would give us a couple of weeks to sort of synthesize all of the bills and try to provide you a report before we came back. And we were wondering if we could come back on the 20th in person. And we would try to do as quickly as possible. I don't think you have to give us more time, but we'd like to sort of give you a high level of all of the issues that impacted Pueblo, and condense it into a report and do a presentation for you.
I have, I don't have any openings until, I maybe could squeeze you in on June 3rd. Would that work?
Let me see. I know that, let me make sure with my colleagues here that they're okay with that, the 3rd.
I think we can make that work, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we're just booked.
Yeah, and we just think if we come back next week, because so many of these bills will not be signed by the governor, they'll be heading to his desk. We'd like to be able to report out on the bills potentially that the governor vetoed or he didn't sign, and those that he signed. So that gives us that gives us enough time.
Great, okay.
And if it's okay, we'll come in person.
Okay, great. And I will get you down for the 3rd. Mr. Gomez, do you have questions?
Yeah, Gil, I understand the assault weapons ban was killed, but just for clarification for me, what definition of assault weapons are they utilizing?
We can, I don't know if you have that information, either Alec or Ryan, but if not, we'll send you the text of that so you can see it was a fairly broad definition, but we'll get that to you.
All right, thank you.
A question for Alec. You were talking about the ADU bill passing. Was there any amendments taking local in that bill in regards to a local control, taking
So-
away from local control?
Madam Chair, there's been several amendments that have been added in the Senate over the last 2 days. We haven't had a chance to digest all those completely, but I will definitely follow up with you on those amendments. And again, once it clears the Senate, it will have to go back over to the House for them to concur with those amendments. So we were just kind of just waiting a little bit to see how the dust settles on those.
Mhm. Okay. And, I saw on social media somewhere where there was a bill coming across the table, removing the term woman and mother from state, what was it, the state law written in the writings of state writings, publishings?
Madam Chair, I'll have to double check on that one for you. I think I know what you're talking about, though.
Mm-hmm.
we'll follow up with an email tomorrow on that question. I do recall some debate on that. There are a lot of we've been working this through the weekend, so sorry for a little scatterbrained, but we'll get back to you on that one. But I remember hearing some debate on that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking that was kind of ridiculous,
Yeah.
kind of thing to happen. And hopefully it didn't pass. I mean, I don't think that women don't need to go backwards.
Yeah.
Today, we need to continue to move forward. So,
As I told you, there was a bill on graduation attire, so it's been one of those sessions. So we'll double check on that
yeah, there's been a lot.
one. Well,
All right.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work, gentlemen, and have a
Thank
good evening.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Thank
next.
you.
Thank you all.
All righty, thank you. Next up, we have the wastewater study, rate study with our Director of Wastewater, Andrea, and you are also bringing, is it Melanie? Okay, great, ladies.
So my name's Sandra Aarons, and I'm here to discuss the wastewater rate study. The Pueblo Municipal Code requires that the city council review wastewater rates no less often than every 2 years. So we did start that last year. They'll be reviewed again next year. This has been an ongoing process to try to make sure that the rates are as low as we can possibly make them, with some of the challenges that we're having with infrastructure costs going up, as well as all of the personnel issues. And Melanie is with FCS Group, and she is here to present the rates and the study that we conducted.
All right, thank you, Andra. My name is Melanie Hobart. I am with FCS Group. I'm a project manager there. Unfortunately, my colleague Jason Mumm was not able to make it today. He had a family emergency, so you just get me. We can, I think if I, all right. Our agenda today, we're going to go through a little bit of background in terms of what the wastewater rate study was scoped to be. We're going to talk a little bit about the status where we started the study. And then we're going to go into the meat of the presentation, which is the annual revenue requirements. We're going to talk about the assumptions and policies, the capital needs, which are one of the main things driving the revenue requirements and the rates, and then the recommended rate path. And then just to end, we'll have questions and next steps.
Thank you.
All right. So for a little bit of background, FCS Group has been scoped to perform a wastewater rate study. This year, we had 2 tasks. Well, I suppose last year, technically, we had 2 tasks. The first was to update the 10-year forecast. So that was 2024 through 2033. That's the period we'll be looking at today. We do that for several reasons. One of them is to assess primarily the sufficiency of the rates in the forecast. We also develop alternative scenarios to make sure that we are meeting the city's policy goals, one of which is maintaining that average residential bills are less than 1.5% of the median household income. And then the last one is just to maintain compliance with the city's fiscal policies. So those are the main goals of the rate forecast. We also were scoped to do a plan investment fee and connection fee review. We worked with staff and we looked at the existing fee and the available changes that would go into the update. And we determined that at this time, we actually don't recommend an update. So we're going to revisit that later this year and potentially later year with staff when we determine it is necessary. But for now, we've kind of tabled that scope item. All right, so for a little bit of background, there was a rate study last done in 2021. There was a proposed rate path. When we talk about a rate path, what we're talking about is an annual rate revenue adjustment year over year. The recommendation coming out of that was a 5% annual increase to rates in 22 and 23, a 3% in 24, and then a 3.5%. So roughly inflationary through 2031, which was the end of that rate study period. As we look at the rate study this year, the main difference you're going to see is the near-term capital spending. So what we have is we have about 180 million in capital spending between 24 and 28. That is a $74.5 million increase from the last study. And we'll get into a little bit of what those projects are. And if you have specific questions, I am going to kick it back to Andrea to address those. But generally speaking, it's about repair and replacement of aging infrastructure. There are annual electrical system rehab programs. And then there's a bunch of permit standards that need upgrades, nutrient removal upgrades to meet them. So it's largely permit driven. All right, so to take a step up, this is what we call a revenue requirement. A revenue requirement is an evaluation. It's a multi-year evaluation of your utility to make sure you're meeting your fiscal policies year over year. The reason we do it is it promotes long-term financial stability. It gives you that forecast throughout the period so you can see what's coming. And by having that, you can minimize the impact on your ratepayers in any given year in the near term. So we use that long-term forecast to make sure that we don't have any surprises coming and we can build up to any big changes down the road. What goes into a revenue requirement is in the graphic at the bottom here. There's a lot of different things. So we start with a capital plan and the capital funding plan. So is it bonds? Is it state loans? Is it rate revenue? That's one piece. We consider the city's financial policies as kind of a map, a guideline of the forecast over the next 10 years. And then we put in the economic assumptions, which as we know are ever changing. And then we include the operating costs, of course, and then the debt service as well. So those are all the pieces that come together in the revenue requirement that we're going to see. But first, the main assumptions that we have, the top of this box here, I don't want to get into every number, but what we have is we do have inflationary increases year over year. We start with a 2024 budget and we apply these inflationary factors. They range depending on what they are, whether it's labor or benefit or construction, but they range between about 2.75 is the lowest up to about 4.5 throughout the forecast period. Those are intentional. Those are based on typically 5-year historic averages of the indices we track. So we are looking at costs individually to make sure we are appropriately capturing them down the road. For the operating forecast itself, we do base it on the 24 budget, as I mentioned, and use inflation from there. We start at the beginning fund balances at the beginning of 2024 or the end of year balances in 23. For those, we have 3 main reserves that we're tracking. We've got your operating reserve with about 12.3 million, your capital reserve with about 39 or 37.9, excuse me, and then your debt reserve with 13.7. I'm going to take a bit of a sidetrack here. I just want to flag one of the changes we made in this rate study this year, working with staff and working with representatives of the state, is we have adjusted the debt reserve level. We asked the question of why it was at 13.7 million when that is large compared to the amount of debt you have outstanding. So what we've done is we've been able to reduce that to industry standard, which is 1 annual debt payment in reserve. So by doing that, we've been able to pay off some loans. So we spent about 1.5 million to pay off loans early, so you don't have to follow up with that interest down the road. And we've also freed up $8 million to use towards capital in the short term. So that's really reduced pressure on rates. So we're just making sure that the reserves you have are being best utilized to meet policies and avoid risk, but also to, further your capital needs as well. So that's one big change. About that 13.6 million there. We do have it down to about 2.5, I believe, long term. And just below that, you can see the 2 loans that we are paying off early. It's the 2009 and the 2014 state loan. On the right, we have the details of the debt issuances. The main thing I want to point out here is the state loans. In the forecast scenario, we are only recommending the use of state loans, not revenue bonds. The state loans, we have an interest rate of 3% and a 20-year payment term. And we are assuming that payments don't start until the projects are complete. So for both instances, that's 2 years after the money is received. And then last, we do have a growth rate of about 0.5% per year. We use the growth rate to forecast rate revenue before any rate increases, just to make sure we're capturing any revenue changes due to growth. Okay, we also have some guiding policies. There are 3 key ones that we're looking at in the forecast. The first is your operating reserve. The operating reserve is there to accommodate fluctuations throughout the year in your cash flow. This is pretty industry standard. The policy is 90 days of operating expenses. By 90 days, we simply mean if revenues stop coming in tomorrow, you could operate for 90 days at your current level of service. That is not going to happen, but that's how we think about operating reserves. The benchmark for that is about 3 million in 2024 to give you an idea of how much that reserve is. For the capital reserve, we think about it a little bit differently. The goal of the capital reserve is to address emergency repairs. So if a major piece of equipment were to go out tomorrow, do you have enough cash on hand to handle that in the near term until you can get outside funding or other support? So to address that, we recommend 1% of the cost of system assets, which is consistent with what the utility's been doing. That is a $2.1 million reserve in 2024. Both those reserves will be going up throughout the forecast with inflation, as we would expect to see. And then the last policy here is the debt service coverage. This is all about compliance with your debt covenants. This is about preserving your future credit rating if you need to utilize debt in the future. The policy strictly is a 1.1 or 110%. That just means that your net revenue as a ratio of your debt service payments annually. What we are actually recommending is a 1.5, so a 150%. We like to be a little bit more conservative on this. This is something we are seeing rating agencies lean a little bit heavier on these days. So we wanted to bring that up to 1.5. It is not in any way, it is well above that throughout the forecast here. You have a lot of capacity for debt if you wanted to go that way. So this is not a driving policy, but I did want to address it. All right. So I mentioned before that there was a previous rate path. This is here just to show you, given the changes we've talked about of the capital funding and the new budget and the inflationary factors, what would happen if you continued to follow that path without any changes. This is the combined ending fund balance. So this is your operating and capital reserve in combination at the end of the year. You can see in 2024, I think you're around 46 million. You have that 75 million more in capital in the next couple of years. So this would drop quickly. The dashed line here is the minimum target balance. So that's just the combination of the 90 days of operating and that 1% of capital. This is just reference. This is not what the forecast will look like, but just to give you some frame of the kind of changing situation we're looking at. All right. This is the main driving factor. So this here shows the cumulative capital spending in inflated dollars, so in year of construction, of the previous study from 2021 and the current study. So the dark line, that navy line on the bottom, is the cumulative capital spending from the previous study. The study only went through 2031. That was the window of that study. The green line on top is the cumulative spending in this study. And what I would really draw attention to is in those first couple of years, you can see that's where the additional spending really is focused. So we are seeing that increase in cost in those first 2 years through 2026. And that's what's driving a lot of the need here. And that you can see at the bottom here are some of the main costs. It's actually primarily that secondary clarifier replacement. That's the increased capital. All right, so when we think about how you're going to fund capital, this is one of the biggest questions in a rate study, specifically in yours. You have the cash flow to cover your operating needs without any trouble. Where you are looking at is how to fund your capital plan going forward. That covers everything from R&R, so repair and replacement, to the permit requirements, the expansion projects, all of it. And when we consider that in total, this is your annual total capital spending. Not differentiated by project, but differentiated by funding source. So again, that navy is going to be your cash funded. We call it cash funded. It's really rate funded capital. That's what's going to be your primary capital funding source at that 77.9 or 78% of your capital will be rate funded. We have about 1% of connection fee revenue. You can barely see it on there. It's that kind of teal slice at the top of every bar that's just coming in each year. And then we have about 20.7 or 21% of your capital, those tan segments, those are going to be state loans. So we have 2 issuances, and we'll talk more about them in a couple minutes. But the first one is in 25-26, and the second comes in 29. Okay, so I mentioned the revenue requirement before. This is the graphic we use to represent a revenue requirement. This looks at an annual expenses year over year. So to orient you what we're looking at, the bars are the expenses, they are stacked, and the lines are rate revenue or overall operating revenue, not just rate revenue. So what we're seeing here, those navy bars at the bottom are your operating expenses. We then have that kind of turquoise teal color, that's your existing debt service. It is dropping in 25 as you pay off a loan, and then your existing loans end in 2030. We then have that orange bars. That's the new debt service associated with those two state loan issuances. And then on top of that, in the purple, you can see that is your rate funded capital. This, I think, really well illustrates that, you know, your primary driver here is your capital. We see this everywhere. This is not unique to you, but it's important just to remember how capital heavy running a utility is, and that's what's driving this. The solid green line, that's your operating revenues, so your rates and non-rate revenues at your existing rates. So if you made no changes. And then you can see above that, the dashed yellow line, a little sneak peek here. What we are recommending is a 5% annual increase throughout the forecast. And you can see that is what would happen to your revenues. You'd be able to cover that additional rate funded capital throughout the forecast. With that recommendation and the updated costs, you can see here, this is that updated ending fund balance graphic. So again, this is the amount of funds you would have in your operating and capital reserve at the end of each fiscal year. This is compared to that minimum target balance. I'll point out a couple key things here. First is that we have created the forecast so that you never drop below that minimum target balance. That's kind of a bottom line principle in the forecast. The second thing you'll see here is that the funds fluctuate year over year. So you can see in 25, that's when that first state loan comes in. You're using that over a couple years. You use it down, you're using your fund reserves there to fund other capital projects. In 29, we see that second issuance come in, and then you're using that over that period as well. So as we would expect to see, fund balances are shifting year over year, but we are keeping you above that minimum target balance. All right. This is your annual debt service forecast. It's a big part of your your capital plan and your operating expenses. That navy bar is your existing annual debt service payment. It's about 1.5 year over year starting next year when that one loan sunsets, and that payment is ending in 2030. And then the green bars here represent those two new state loans as they come online. So you can see that the loan comes in 25, as I mentioned. That's a $39 million loan. That's for the secondary clarifier replacement. But the payments begin in 2027 once the project has been completed. Same with the second loan. It's $32.2 million, and it's in 2029, and that covers two projects. That's the gravity thickener and the tertiary process. And then those payments would also begin 2 years later in 2031 when you see that green bar increasing. This is just the rate forecast graphically. We had in the previous forecast starting in 2025, it would have been a 3.5% annual increase through the end of that period, which was 2031. In our updated forecast with the updated costs, we are looking at a 5% annual increase to cover those needs. And then this is that I mentioned at the beginning, the median household income measurement. So you can see here your total utility bill is a % of the median household income. It is, as you can see, you are well below that 1.5% marker at the beginning of the forecast. As you get towards the end of the forecast in 2032, you do hit to the 1.5, and I think it's 1.52 in 2033. This is something that we should keep our eye on as we go on, something that, you know, we don't know precisely what will happen in 10 years, but this is certainly something that we'll keep an eye on as we go and consider as we consider rate forecasts down the road. All right, so that brings me to the summary. We are recommending a 5% increase annually through 2033. The primary driver of that is that $74.7 million additional capital To help address that, we are recommending use of the state loans in 25 and 29, and that's 71 million there. In terms of next steps, we would recommend, coming in annually, we'll be back each year to look at how the actuals monitor against the plan. This is something that if the past 4 years have taught us anything, things can change quickly. And we want to keep an eye on it year over year to make sure we're watching expenses change and the capital needs. And then potentially later this year or next year, we will take another look at the PIF and connection fees, the plan investment fees and connection fees, to see if we recommend an increase there down the road. And then the last slide I have for you here is just what the rates would look like with that 5% increase just in the next 3 years. So it would bring that kind of 3/4 inch standard meter charge up to $27.64, and then the per kgal of use up to $6.45. So 5%, but it is about a 35 to 40 cent increase per year on that kgal charge, and just over $1 on the meter for most customers. And that's all I've got. So I am open for questions.
Any questions from council?
Yes,
Counselor Hernandez?
Madam Chair, thank you. Good evening, Ms. Hobart.
Yes.
You familiar with the Colorado Public Utility Commission?
Yes.
I was the chief economist for over 10 years.
Excellent.
And prior to that, 3 decades of preparing rate studies. So I follow this pretty well, but it's a
Excellent.
lot of information.
It always is. Yes.
Can you go back up front to you started your presentation? Want to just get some things clarified.
Yep.
Right, it's right in here. So near-term annual cost inflation, of course, the first basic question is the general CPI 4.5
Mhm.
versus 3.5. So and the long-term cost inflation, why was that assumption lowered, if you will?
Why was it lowered? It was-
Or is it, is the 3.5% general CPI embedded in this?
Yes,
Okay.
it's 3.5% starting in 2025 going forward. The 4.5 reflects the historic 5-year, but what the indices that we've been seeing and the forecasts we've been watching have projected it'll go back down, not as far down as we've seen it historically, but down to a 3.5, which is still pretty conservative when you look at the 10-year average
Okay.
or longer for the general CPI.
Okay. On the, could you go forward on the capital reserve?
This one?
So when you're looking at the capital reserve and actually the capital investment of the system entirely.
Yep.
And it's the age of it, as far as the average life, certainly that will impact increasing operating repairs and so forth
Yes.
as the system ages. But when you're
Yes.
looking at, I guess, an infusion of 75 million of capital,
Yep.
which is about, I think about 40% increase, right?
Yep.
Right. So those two things diverge, if you will, because as the system, the historical system ages, if you will.
Yeah.
Of course, with proper maintenance, it's still going to need repairs, and you still have things that are unexpected that do happen, and that's your reserve in that aspect of it, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm understanding that.
Okay.
The
I can
next,
just
go ahead,
really
yes.
quickly, I will add for the capital reserve, it's 1% of the cost of assets.
Right.
As new assets come online, as the capital plan is executed over the forecast, we are adding that to
Right.
that 1%.
Right.
Just to
Understand. You
clarify, to
keep
make sure
building
that
up
we're
the,
continuing to raise the
the
value.
book
with the-
value, if you will.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, could you go forward a little bit?
Yep.
Okay, right here. I'm good with this. Next slide. So in 2025, what this demonstrates here is the 75 million of CapEx that's needed.
Mhm.
Am I understanding this right? So that the
Yes.
top bar above the connection fee revenue,
Mhm.
that 10, if you will, is SRF loans, which is financing the capital, okay?
That's right. Yep.
And the reason that the connection fee revenue is so de minimis is because you have like 0.5%
That's right.
assumption and increase in connections or
Yes.
increase in growth.
Yes.
So help me understand, make sure I'm understanding that question, or I'm
Mhm.
asking that question with clarity, that the 0.5%, is that for? Explain what that means, okay?
Yep. So what we use the 0.5%, the growth rate for, we use it for two things. The primary thing, which I mentioned earlier, is the rate revenue that we track over time. But where it relates here, I think where you're getting at, is the connection fee revenue. What we do with that is we, using the 0.5% of growth year over year, we apply that to your customer base. And we make an assumption about how much connection fee revenue you would be getting year over year.
Okay, so that customer base, you look at premises or the growth within the city at large, how do those two things
So
work
what
into
we,
this?
yeah, so what we make a simplifying assumption here. We look at the number of customers or the equivalent residential customers.
Okay,
And we'll apply that 0.5%, and then we'll apply that residential fee to it to get a ballpark, knowing that this is something that, we can pencil out, but is very unpredictable. So that's the methodology we
Right.
use.
so I guess my question in summary is, for these planned developments that are underway,
Mhm.
okay, there's some pretty big footprints, if you will.
Yeah.
Have you considered those, or how do you consider those?
We have not, no.
you
We
don't.
tend to be pretty conservative in our
Okay.
connection fee revenue forecast.
All right,
Just knowing that it can be pretty unpredictable. We don't want to rely on it.
right.
But if there are large developments that are underway that we expect to see, we can work with staff and
Sure.
incorporate that.
Well, that helps additional revenue streams that
Yes,
are not factored in here that you're not sure of. Right?
yes,
Okay.
yes. We tend to, like I mentioned, for connection fees as well as any sort of capital funding, we tend to use the conservative assumption always to make sure that we're not setting you up ever to have a shortfall. So we're going to say, we're using loans here because we know that we can get them. If you needed additional capital funding, we would recommend bonds because they're a little bit more expensive. If you get a loan or a grant, that's wonderful. And we can, recalibrate down the road, but we want to make sure you have enough no matter what happens to afford what you need to afford. So.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, pan forward one slide.
Yeah.
Okay, this is an important one.
Yes.
So if I'm understanding again, that above the existing debt service, that purple, if you will,
Mhm.
kind of a mauve,
Yep.
is where the CapEx comes into play.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the rate funded capital.
And as you get up to the $30 million bar, that horizontal bar above that would be the shortfall or deficiency.
At your existing rates. If there were no rate increases.
If there was no, okay.
That's right.
Right, I said deficiency, but that's
Yes,
no
yep,
rate,
that's just the dip. Yep, yep.
okay. And that trajectory there reflects 5% every year, and that's what you said earlier in your
Yep.
presentation. Okay,
That's right. Yep.
okay. Okay, go forward, please.
This one.
Go forward. Go forward. Let me just go to my notes here. So why the median, the 1.5, holding static, the 1.5% of the
Yeah,
median income, and what is the median income?
I would have to get back to you on what that is. What we do though. we do-
38,000, 40,000, something anyway, Council Flores, do you
47.
remember that
Uh,
50, that high? For Pueblo?
It's 49.5
Okay,
in 2023. So we're at 51 this year. So the way that we do that is we look at the median household income in 23. And
okay,
then we apply escalation going forward. And then we look at the rates and then we apply the rate increases going forward. So it's a continual, both the household income and the rates are moving throughout the forecast to
Okay.
reflect what we expect as best as we can to happen.
So my question then is if you're holding static
Yeah.
to the 50,000, let's just round it off, 1.5%,
Mhm.
trying to maintain that level of rates, if you will,
Yep.
right? And you have the capital requirements going up 40%, more than that,
Mhm.
45% with 75 million.
Yeah.
Then it seems to be that there's still going to be a shortfall because you're holding static the amount of revenues from customers, if you will, at 1.5 of the 50,000.
So the 50,000 goes up year over year throughout the.
Well, we hope
forecast
it
as well.
does. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
yes, that is
All
the
right.
built-in assumption that it is
Okay.
also going up throughout the forecast.
All right,
So
all right.
as the rates go up, the 50,000 is as well.
okay. And that goes to your previous slides that reflect that trend,
That's right.
5% increase.
That's right. And what you're
Okay.
seeing here is that the 5% is higher
Okay.
than what we expect the income to go up at. And
Okay.
that's why we're closing this gap over time. Again, not immediately, but those last 2 years, the forecast you're at or above that 1.5.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of
Madam
course.
Chair, thank you.
Counselor Latino?
Yes. I rely on Councilman Hernandez because of his background. I have a little bit of background myself, but not to that level. And so my concerns again, this community doesn't live on 5% a year in increase. They do not. Okay. The majority of people in this community do not gather from their livelihood an additional 5% in income. It doesn't happen. So my question is, what can we do? Meaning you and this council and the city to be a little more realistic about things.
Well, that's a great question. We recognize, of course, I recognize that 5% is not the easiest forecast to swallow year over year. That is understood. What I would say, this is always a tough message. At the end of the day, capital costs are driving utility rates up. And there's a couple different ways you can address that. One thing that we haven't leaned on here heavily is additional revenue bond funding. There's a push-pull always in terms of cash funding and loan funding your capital projects. So by using additional outside funding sources, you would have higher long-term costs, but you might be able to bring those short-term increases down a little bit. There's always a push-pull, right? So one of the advantages of the 5% is it's setting you up to primarily rate fund your capital and not rely on outside sources long-term. But recognizing the 5% can be challenging, that is one option. The other options would be, and Andrew's going to hate me for saying this, costs are the main driver. So if revenues can't be as high as they need to be in the forecast, the only real other option is to cut costs. And I'm not recommending that, knowing, having seen the operating and the capital needs, that's certainly not my recommendation, but it is at the end of the day, it is a revenue neutral forecast. So as you can see from the fund balance projection, we're not building reserves here. We're kind of using everything you have. And then the third thing I would say is a robust affordability program, a low income credits or something like that could be put in place. I believe the city has one already, maybe not. No, it would be a separate policy, separate of utility rates, but it could be applied there. So that's something that could be considered long-term if there is a concern.
Can I jump in? Can I ask a question from this? You have a slide that went from 30 million fund balance, and if nothing happened, it went down to a -10.
Yeah.
So elaborate on that then as to your response to Councilor Latino.
So a lot of this is coming from the secondary clarifier project, and it's right now estimated to be $50 million. So we were trying to come up with 10 million in the short term to account for the loans that we will have to get. And it's not driven by, it's driven by the state of Colorado. We need to meet our compliance issues there. So that's one of the things that's going on, as well as we're looking at the nutrients coming up, and that's what's going on in 2029. So a lot of this is not coming from, one, the equipment is aging. Most of the equipment at the plant was put in the late 80s. So you'll see like the electrical system. We are planning on like spending 10 million this year. And then that's just, there's 7 phases and we're in phase 4. So nothing's getting cheaper. And so that's part of, and to your point, Counselor Latino, I totally agree. This is very expensive, but you should also realize that most of the infrastructure we rely on is over 40 years old. So we are constantly putting in money into both the collection system and the water reclamation facility as well. And the connection fees and the PIF fees, which we're not looking at right now, are used for expansion for growth specifically. So this is just funding these capital projects for the most part. Actually, almost all of it, except for inflationary operating costs.
Okay, Counselor Gomez.
Can you clarify the term nutrient for me?
Phosphorus, nitrogen,
I'm sorry?
and phosphorus, nitrogen, and also ammonia. Right now, we're under the state adopted Reg 85 in 2018. We've been working, and those are technologically based limits. So we've been under those. We've been working with something called the Voluntary Incentive Program to optimize our treatment so that we get more time in the future to meet lower limits, which are right now about 1 for nitrogen and 1 for phosphorus. And then our ammonia will also go down. That will require tertiary treatment. We also are looking at in 2028, our discharger specific variance is going to be either renewed or go away. So we're going to have to we're looking at pilots now to work with both nutrients, selenium and sulfate. So we've got to work on that too. That right now, the cost of just selenium and sulfate treatment is 150 million just to put the treatment in, and then approximately 90 million for O&M going forward. So that's how we were able to get the discharge specific variance, because it's not economically feasible. So we're constantly looking at ways to bring down the rates. The 5% came out of after we worked with Melanie and her group, trying to pay off the debt, trying to make sure we could bring it down. But the clarifier project originally, when we first looked at it, was between 16 and 66 million. The new estimate came in at 49 million. So that's why the rates went up. We were hoping to keep them more towards inflationary, but originally they were proposed at 5.8 and we've got them to at least 5. And we're trying to work on making sure that we do have capital for some of the other things that are going on as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
Counselor Flores.
If you go to slide 4, which is at the very beginning,
Yes.
the proposed rate path adjustment, had you known in 2021 that we were going to have the inflation that we did in 2023, how would that look? It would look a lot different, wouldn't it?
It would look a lot different. Yes.
And,
Yes.
you know, the one thing that I think that saves us, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that we could borrow money at 3% from the state
Yes.
is amazing in my mind. And that's probably why our debt service did not suffer the inflationary factor as far as our operating costs.
That's right.
Because I'm sure that a lot of the product that we use at the plant is much more expensive than it was back in 21. And then, you know, we have the natural labor costs and stuff. So that you're saying, which I think is true, that if we wanted to borrow money at a much higher interest rate,
Right.
all we're doing is just pushing out how long we're going to be in debt. And I'm not sure I want to do that, but I wanted to go back to slide 7. And I wanted to be clear, I understood when you look at our debt service coverage,
Mhm.
you're indicating that we have to stay below 150 in order not to hurt our credit rating.
Above 150.
Yeah, yeah, I said, I
Yes,
meant
yep,
over
yes.
150.
Yes.
And so we're not at that level at all at this
No.
point.
No, you're not.
Okay.
No, nope. And I can look, your debt coverage right now, I believe when I looked earlier, you're well above that. I think the lowest it comes is around 5. So,
Right.
um,
Slide 11, I need clarification on that.
yes,
If you look at the green line, the light green.
yep, the solid green line. Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to indicate, I'm trying to see that graph and understand why we need the increases above that line. You would think that the increase per year could stay on that line and that we would be all right. But I don't think I'm looking at that correctly.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here, the solid green line there,
Mhm.
that would be your revenues if you did not make any rate adjustments. So it does increase throughout the forecast. You can see it goes up a little bit
Mhm.
by 2033. That's due to that growth rate that we've included, that 0.5%. The 5%, and this actually really well illustrates it, the capital is driving your forecast here. So in terms of when we look at a revenue requirement,
Mhm.
your existing rate revenues, you are meeting your operating and your debt service needs. But with the capital that you have, and we're seeing this everywhere again, this is not unique to you, but it is well illustrated here. It's really primarily the capital that's driving it. So to your question earlier, we could utilize revenue bonds and add on to that orange bar as we look at the forecast and cut down from the amount of purple bar we're using up there, that rate funded capital, and end up somewhere below 5%. It would still be, I think, at a minimum inflationary around 3%, very minimum. And I don't want to promise that without running the numbers, but it would be at least inflationary. So yes, there is a little bit of cushion there. How you want to fund capital is the big question. But the revenue bonds would be more expensive and they would be adding that long-term cost.
But
That
this
doesn't.
holds us harmless here as far as meeting all of our costs.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yep. So the bars, those are your total costs. So that's your, the 5% is how you meet those.
I just
Yeah.
have one last question.
course.
Do we know the median invoice a customer gets in the city?
Unfortunately, I do not. I can get that for you if you'd like it.
I think it would be important because of, if we were to say it's $30 a month, whatever that is, we're basically saying that we're going to be increasing on an annual basis. If it's 5%, on my example, it would be $1.50 additional.
Right,
To me, it looks a lot more palatable when we look at it that way.
dollars.
Because a lot of what you're asking us to do
Mhm.
is really infrastructure that's really being mandated by the
Yes.
states and the feds. And we need to get in compliance. There's just no other choice there. So you've done a great job of explaining that and I appreciate it.
Okay, President Aliff.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I guess this is my third rate study
Okay,
presentation. And literally you could probably record the first one and it would be the same. You just plug in different numbers. But I was sitting here thinking, and I'm thinking 30 years ago or 25 years ago, when there was a city council sitting here, and I would imagine that they heard the same things. We have infrastructure needs, we have aging equipment, so on and so forth. And we had continual rate increases for those last 25 or 30 years, based upon the assumption that at some point we would have a great system and we'd be able to keep up with our infrastructure. And it just never happens. Every 2 years, it's just, we just keep going and going and going. We need more money. We need more money. We need more money. The reality of it is if you take the rate study from 21, which went into effect in 22 and 23, there was a 10% increase in those 2 years, which is 16 and a half if you go to 2020, now or 13% through 2024, right? Which if we adopt the new numbers, we're literally looking at a 58% increase in our bills over the next 10 years.
Yes.
Not to mention that in 2 years, you're going to do another rate study, which is going to come back and tell us we need to be at 6% or 7%, or we don't have enough money. We have needs in our infrastructure, our equipment's aging, and the state's putting a lot of different requirements on us. And I get that. I understand that those things need to happen. But at some point, we have to be responsible for the ratepayer, the constituents, the people who pay these bills. And it becomes untenable, in my opinion, when we just constantly, year after year after year, say it's not enough, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. The increases of, if you look at the solid green line, when we're on slide 11 right now, at the last rate study, my suggestion would be is that we stick with what was approved the last time. We wait till the next rate study, which you're going to start next year, right?
Yes.
It's hard to believe that inflation and costs are going to stay as high as they are right now. So our assumptions, your assumptions when you did the study was the certain numbers that are based upon what the market is now. The clarifier is going to cost $74 million in additional revenues needed for over the next 10 years. But is that the case? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we need to breathe a little bit and allow the ratepayers to breathe a little bit and say, you know what, we'll just stay where we're at for right now. We have another rate study coming in 2 years, and we'll look at it then and see where costs are at and what's it, where we need to be. But at some point, again, and I can't imagine, I don't think it's ever happened, and this has nothing to do with either one of you. I mean, it's just saying, I've never seen a rate study where they said, great news, your rates are going down and everything's less expensive and it's going to get better. But I think we have a responsibility to the ratepayers to do the best we can to try and keep rates down, not put people in. I understand $1.50 here, $5 here, you know, another $10 for a hamburger, so on and so forth, and people just can't even live. And it doesn't have to do with specifically their bill here, but it just adds on and adds on and adds on. So, I mean, that's where I personally stand, is that I'm not supportive of a 5% increase every year over the next 10 years under any circumstances at this point. So I am.
Okay. Counselor Martinez, do you have anything?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Counselor Maestri. I guess to Counselor Flores's point, I'd be curious of like what this means in tangible dollars and cents. And like, are we talking about $1.50 to Counselor Aliff's point? Are we talking about more? And Andra, can you remind me, are these will be assessed, like the consumers will be paying this extra on a monthly basis, not an annual basis, correct?
Yes, it depends on when you're billed, because you get the flat fee, which if you'll go at the inside.
Yeah.
So you get the flat fee based on your meter size. And then for non-industrial, then if you go above, it's per 1,000 gallons is what you're charged. So
Okay.
that's what these are. And to President Aloff's point, there was a point of a lot of deferred maintenance of the system 20, 30 years ago. The rates actually didn't start to get increased until early 2010, 2012. And then from then, yes, they've gone up and down. Actually, there's been certain years where we haven't increased. So we are willing to look and see. We're not voting to, the council is not voting for the next 10 years. We're only voting in 4-year segments so that they can be adjusted. If things change, we want to change as well. And we are always looking at the MHI, because we also care about our customers as well, to make sure that we're not 5% of their income or 10%. We're trying to keep it as affordable as possible as well, but still maintain a system so that we don't have backups or collapses or sinkholes, which has happened.
Counselor Flores?
Well, oh, really fast, I wasn't done. So Andra, I guess, can we have these numbers with plus like a 5%, the recommended 5% fee on it, just to see what it looks like?
Yeah, so the slide up now does show you that. I
Oh,
can get
okay.
the median one, and then you can see what the, I'm sorry, I'm rounding up, just $1.
Yeah.
Looks like
Okay.
for 2025, and then it looks like about $3 for 26, and then another $1 for 2027.
And would these changes start in January then?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess my original thought is, because I think that these are pretty minimal changes that, and I appreciated what you said about, we're voting in 4-year increments, that I don't want to keep kicking the can down the road, because I think that if we end up having an issue where we need to have, a major sinkhole, that's going to cost us way more money to treat and repair that than I guess the prevention of maintaining a healthy system. So, I guess that's where I'm at.
Okay, Counselor Flores first.
I wanted to bring up another obligation that we have as a city council. It's not only trying to have the lowest rates, but we have an obligation to have a system that works for our community, and it is a safe system, and taking into consideration their health. And then secondarily, the discharge and the obligations that we have of putting this water back into the river, that there is another huge obligation to people downstream. So it's much more than just looking out for the rates every year, but being able to comply with EPA and all of the other, especially with selenium, which we have no control over, but I mean, it costs us a ton of money to deal with that thing in our soil that we can't do anything about it. So, there's a balance here. And I just wanted to say that for the record.
Counselor, President Aliff?
I just wanted to clarify one thing for all of the counselors. I hope everybody understands this. If we did nothing, there's still a 3.5% increase in 2025 and forward. There's not any increase. It's 3% for 2024, and it bumps 3.5% to 2025 through 2031. All I'm saying, and that's 3.5% every year, if I'm not mistaken.
It's only adopted at 3%. So if you did nothing, it would just stay at 3%.
Okay.
There is
so
no 3.5. So
fine, then it's at 3%. So, and it'll go up 3% in 2025. It'll go up 3% again in 2026, up 3% again. So it's not like it's just stagnant. And all I'm saying is that we shouldn't make a decision to bump it up unless you're comfortable with that until a couple years from now, when on the new rate study, when you see how inflation's acting. That was my argument.
Okay,
I'll go next. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify and add on to that, could you go to the slide that here again reflects the 30 million fund balance going down to the 10 million negative fund balance relative to Counselor Aliff's
Yes.
point. So the increases that are already embedded in that he's referring to,
Yes.
are these in consideration of that, as well as the capital needs of 75 million? Is that what causes this in 2026?
So this reflects the increases that are already in there. I believe it does not have the updated full loan amount. So there is a little bit of a gap there. But otherwise, all of the costs are consistent. It's just so it does have the 3.5% annual increases starting in 2025 going forward incorporated in this trajectory. 3.5. So it's not the adopted, it's the longer term forecast from the last rate study. Recognizing that, like we have here today, we're not asking you to, adopt 10 years, but we have looked out 10 years. So we've taken that 3.5% from the longer portion of that rate study and plugged it in, even though it isn't adopted.
So try to clarify this for me, Ben. What I'm
Yes.
looking at here on slide 8 from 2024 of like 6 million fund balance, right?
Yep.
Okay, and the fund balance down to 30 million next year.
Yes.
Okay. Considering the 3.5% increases that are already the revenues that are coming in,
Yes.
but because of the needs, it's dropping at a faster rate
That's right.
than the 3% or 3.5%
That's
revenue
right.
stream coming in.
That's right. There's a couple specific things that have increased costs. So
Right.
the inflationary increases, not long-term, but in the couple of years since 21 have had a huge impact. Long-term, we are bringing them down again. But in these couple of years, costs have gone up significantly. And we are basing forecast off of that as we always do, as we would expect to see. And then the second thing is the increased capital. So those two things together are creating just an increased need in the short term. As we've talked about, it's regulatory, it's to meet the permit requirements, as well as just to address the changing costs due to the economic influences there that we've seen over the past 3 years.
I have something.
Counselor
Thank you.
Latino.
Understanding that the cost of living has gone up, but understanding that the majority of people in this state, in this, and in this community in particular, their cost of living increases, whatever their salary might be, whether it's from their labor employment or whatever they've done in their careers. They're not getting 3.5% in their paycheck increases. They're not getting that. Okay. So I'm not even in favor of the 3.5%. So I'm not going to support this.
Understood.
Okay. I know we're not visiting the connection fees at this point, but I do remember when I first came onto council, we did. And it was like a historical the historical raise, like, I don't know, it's 5-10 times more than usual. It used to be like $50 and then it went up
Yes.
to, I don't know, $500.
Yes.
So that's sufficient for now.
Yes, we did look at it and we determined that an increase wouldn't be appropriate now given the data. So
Mhm.
if we were to run that analysis, we don't think there would be any change needed.
Mhm.
There's no increase there.
Because we don't want to get into a situation, because I know that there was a lapse in time since the previous,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden it was a huge amount.
Absolutely.
So you
Yes.
guys are watching that
We are
because, we talk about building affordable housing, and those connection fees can be very expensive when you're trying to provide housing for your community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh,
I just want to have one point that I wanted to bring out. Whether we stay at 3.5 or we go to 5, that doesn't change the need to borrow money in 25, 26, and 29.
That's correct.
That's almost a given because we have no choice at this point. So that assuming that we wait to borrow that money
Mhm.
and stay at 3.5, we would then potentially put ourselves in a position where the cost of the money going forward is going to be greater. And not so much because I think the state gives us a 3% because they got to be feeling guilty of all the rules and regulations that they establish. So I just wanted to be clear that those are loans and infrastructure needs that we need now, not later. And we need to be cognizant of not having to pay a greater cost of money if we wait another 5 years, et cetera, because there's a huge cost there too.
Yes.
I just
absolutely.
wanted to point that out for the record. Thank you.
So just for information, like last budget cycle, the enterprise paid $2 million in loan payments. We paid, there were 4 of them. 2 of them, of course, were paying, 3 of them were paying off this year. And then we have one for 8 million that will be continually paying another million each year for. That's right.
Well, great. We're not voting tonight, so everyone can take time out to study it a little bit more. I'm sure that you're open for further questions
Yes.
at any time, so any counselor could reach out and get their questions answered. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on the agenda is an overview of the, I don't want to say an overview because it's not completed yet, but the 2025 budget plans with our Director of Finance, Alex Romero, and the mayor, and what we're going to be expecting for 2025. And then council will have some of their maybe possible expectations too. Welcome, Alex.
Hello. Okay, let me get everything situated over here. Okay, so we wanted to go through and give a little bit of a budget timeline for 2025. I'll pull up my computer too if there's any questions, but so it's going to be the mayor and I presenting for you tonight. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to highlight the Tabor calculation. So this speaks specifically to the excess revenue that was calculated in 2021. So that amount you can see in the table was 17.268 million. So that was the amount that we had available that we did not have to give back to the residents. And that was due to the ballot issue 2A being passed in November 2021. In 2022, we did not use any of that excess revenue calculation since the budget had already been appropriated and was finalized. Then in 2023, we used 7.5 million of that excess revenue for street rehab. That brought down that running total to the 9.7 million. Then again, in 2024, we did another 7.5 million for the street rehab. And then the plan is in 2025 to do the remaining 2.268827 for street rehab. So I just wanted to show this so you can see exactly where we calculated the excess revenue in 21 and how that has been allocated and appropriated throughout the budget years in 23, 24, and 25. The next item I wanted to highlight were the revenue and expenditure increases from 2020 to 2024. So this is a condensed version of the financials in millions over the last 5 years. So we have the actuals for 2020, 21, and 22, the estimated amounts for 23, and what was budgeted in 2024. And to the side there, I have the areas of note. So of all these figures, some of the more important ones is that sales tax revenue increased to close of 14 million in 2021 versus 2020. You can see that the operating expenditures have held pretty consistent over the last 5 years. The other contributions and donations did increase by $500,000 between 2021 and 2022. The biggest increase was the capital improvement in 22 and then in 23. So that is the third line up, CIP, part of trans. So that's part of the transfers. So you have 5 million, then 1.5 in 2021. Then it jumped to 10 million in 22, then all the way to 25.2, and then back to 12.4 in 2024. And so the decrease in fund balance in 23 and 24 is mainly attributable to the 7.5, which was the excess revenue calculation in 21 for the street rehab. So looking at what our plans are for the 2025 budget. So this is what the finance department and the mayor's office is looking to do now until we send out the budget information to the departments. So the finance department and the budget analyst, we're going to look at line item details in each of the general fund departments and those expenditures. So we want to go through and identify the accounts that have been over budgeted in past years and reduce those amounts to a more realistic amount. So if we're seeing that there's something that we've been budgeting 250,000 for, and traditionally only 150 has been spent out of that account, we will be reducing it when we send it out to that department to that 150. So we're really hoping that we're going to be able to reduce the expenditures quite a bit without actually having to do any real cuts, because we are only going to be taking away money that hasn't been spent traditionally in the past. And this approach, what we're really hoping is that we'll be able to make more significant cuts and not reduce those line item details for budgets that aren't large in scale. So we have a lot of departments that have very small budgets and they use all of them. So rather than looking at a percentage or something of that degree, we want to go through and look at the actual lines that we see the room that we can cut from. With the capital improvements, we are going to review the progress on each of those projects and then see their plan for completion. If there's something out there, and we do have some of these projects that are 7, 8 years old that have remaining funds, and if those are projects that have been completed, we will be proposing to condense that unused funds and allocating it to current or future projects. And the goal there is to not do any additional budgeting dollars in 2025. So just using the money that has already been budgeted and appropriated in other projects. Non-departmental requests. So this is something that's going to change this year. We're going to have it so that all nonprofit organizations have the ability to apply beginning June 3rd. Those applications will need to be completed and returned to the mayor's office at the end of June, that last business day in June. And the applications are going to be similar to what you see for the Colorado grants. It's going to include organizational background, their goals, future plans, what their current programs are. Then it's going to speak to who they collaborate throughout the city and what their governance structure is. Along with that, a list of their board of directors, their current and upcoming fiscal budgets, and financial statements with year end, their current and any audited or reviewed financial statements, and speaking to who their major contributors are, what in kind they have, and the funding sources. So what percentage are they getting from grants, from donors, that sort. And then we'll also be asking for a list of their key personnel and their qualifications, along with a copy of their certificate of good standing and bylaws and their most recently completed tax return form 990. So that brings us to our budget calendar. So every year we have this 2-page budget that we go through that lays out the dates throughout the budget process. So our first being those non-departmental budget requests that'll be in June. And then we have the department budget requests. And so the mayor and finance and HR meet to establish what the goals, objectives, and budget changes are going to be. And so we've already had those discussions. We've started to have those, and you could see that within this presentation on some of the ideas that we're going to be implementing for our 25 budget. Then we go through and we distribute the instruction manual to our department heads. We send out a payroll projection to all the departments. And then in the end of June to the beginning of July, each of the department heads comes in and speaks with the chief of staff, the HR director, the mayor, and myself, and talks about what their needs are. And they're already going to have been supplied with the benchmark budget at that point that will have those line expenditures that are going to be reduced in them. And then we go through and we look at estimates and we move all the way down to where the department is submitting their budget to the mayor. So the mayor's recommended budget and capital improvement plan. We start with the department narratives that are due in the end of July. And then the mayor meets with finance to go through all the budget submissions and identify those that will be moving forward and those that will not be. And then we move into the recommended capital improvement plan. And the final draft budget recommendations are then returned to the department so they know what their budget is looking like as it comes forward to council. And then the mayor finalizes what the recommended 2025 budget and the 25 through 29 capital improvement plan will be. On the other side, it speaks to the city council and their timeline. So we are having this presentation today. Then on October 15th is when the budget is submitted to council by the mayor, and we have our first work session. And some of these other dates for the work sessions, we will speak to those as we get closer and can define which dates we'll actually choose. But we have placeholders right now as the 21st and 28th of October for work sessions, with the public hearing being on October 28th, and then more special work sessions to follow on the 29th and November 4th. The review and adoption of the budget, the first reading will be on November 11th, and then second reading for the public hearing and the appropriation ordinance and mill levy will all be on November 25th. So per charter, here are the items that is described as mayor duties for the budgetary process. So the mayor prepares the budget annually and writes the budget message. They submit the annual budget to city council no later than the first regular meeting in October each year. They're responsible for administration of the budget after the adoption. They keep council advised of financial condition and future needs of the city. And they make recommendations to the council for adoption as they deem necessary. Further in the charter, for the council's budgetary duties, they are to hold a public meeting on the budget within 2 weeks after its submission. After the conclusion of the public hearing, the council may insert new items of expenditures or may increase, decrease, or strike out items of expenditures except for debt service. They adopt the budget, the appropriation ordinance, and the tax levy ordinance prior to the first day of December, and they shall not perform any executive functions except those functions assigned to council by charter. And that concludes the presentation.
Any questions from Councilor Gomez?
Yeah, in reference to, again, it just starting to learn all the stuff, the initial vetting and then the after vetting, I guess the after monitoring, when somebody requests money, let's say, for lack of a better example, Rocky Mountain, sir, comes in and they request $200,000, they get it. Who's responsible for following up and monitoring what they're doing with that money? And how does that report come to us?
Sure. So that is one thing that we're looking at with a new position in the mayor's office, having a nonprofit coordinator that would be doing that at this point. It is the finance department that would be following up with any of those, but we want to have that more of a structured process moving forward.
So of all the councils prior to this council, this is the first time this is being brought up?
It's the first time that this specific position would be added, but it has been finance's duty to make sure that the funds were being appropriated.
But the
I'm just
finance
kinda-
doesn't, sorry, Raj, finance does not essentially go over the expenditures after they've been provided to the non-departmentals. They just issue the check. So this position that I have on May 13th, this non-departmental compliance position would review these asks. It's a very in-depth application that the non-departmentals are gonna have to apply to ask the city for funds. We'll be able to see what they've spent existing funds on that the city's provided. You know, if you're a good steward of your funds and you said you were gonna spend them how you were gonna spend them, then the council can decide if they want to give funds again. If we're just giving funds to pay salaries and they haven't been doing the social aspects that the city thinks that we've been funding you to do and you've been providing, then that's something that the city council will be able to look at. But currently, there is no position that goes line by line to make sure funds are being spent. And that's the position that I spoke to you guys at the council retreat. And it's just now hitting the agenda on the 13th for second reading.
That's long overdue, and I appreciate you doing it. Just again, in reference to grant work and stuff like that, you have goals, objectives of tasks. We all know the game. But again, even the federal government falls behind on monitoring these grants. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are not checked ever. So I love this
Yeah, I
direction
think
beyond.
too, something that I learned when I was on council is when we get those non-departmental asks, and I could show you what one looked like previously. Sometimes we would just get one page document submitted to us with no audits, no financial implications. And we would fund these people
Yeah.
over $900,000. And not that they don't do great work in the community, but to see what every single dollar, how it's being spent. I think that that's something that we can all appreciate, to know where the tax dollars are being spent and how they're being spent. And if the council sees fit to continue those expenditures for those non-departmentals, I think this will give you a very good idea of who's asking for the money, what they're doing with their money, what their mission is, what their budgets look like, if they're financially stable, if they're providing dual services to the community. I'm sure that that's something that the council would not like to fund if somebody else is doing it. If the city has a contractual obligation, like some of the non-departmentals that we have in our budget, like HSPPR, I think, is that the only one that has an actual contractual budget?
No, so we have the State Fair, the Aircraft Museum.
But they don't give dollar amounts. That's still up to the council to
So those
decide.
are within our contractual payment departmental budget.
Right.
And so that's where we need to go through and look at which ones need to be contribution donations and which ones are actually going to be contractual, like the zoo, for instance.
Right.
Well, for an example, let's look at the Chamber of Commerce, for instance. I'm befuddled by a lot of that. We have a contract.
We do not.
Okay, we don't have a track, but we give them 900,000.
We gave them 975,000 last year. That was, that's one of the ones that just provides us a one sheet. We did ask them last year on the council to come back and provide us with more of a detailed budget. But this application that I'm gonna have go out, you're gonna get that beforehand. So you're not gonna have to ask. Anybody will have to fill this out. And it will have to be information that it will show positive stability within their budgets. And that we're just not funding a budget to fund it.
Okay, so if they have let's say the Chili Fest, for instance. If the Chili Fest, according to some folks I've talked to, it's not within our purview to check on that, or are they required to give receipts? Are they required to give the visitors that come in and utilize that event? Are they required to give anything to the city? Since we're giving them money, we don't have a right to review what they're doing in reference to the capturing of that money and how much they're bringing in.
Not on specific events, but they'll be provided financials. I don't know if the chamber lists those kinds of things in their financials that they'll be providing to us.
I'm just curious if that should be.
All revenue sources that they obtain, whether it's grant funding, private donations, the county giving them money, all of that will have to be listed on how their other funds are coming to them, not just what the city funds are that they're receiving. So whether it's a big event that they have, if they wanted to disclose to the council what the Chili Fest brings in, that would be, their desire, but it would probably be good to be transparent and accountable.
So the processing of that money that's coming in, whether it's through vendor fees, whether it's how much sales and use and all that other stuff that they throw at us, the fiduciary responsibility, the big word. I'm just concerned with how does that impact that 950 or 1,000, whatever we're giving them? And if the ask is always the same from us, what happens if they're bringing in 1 million?
Mhm.
How does that impact with how much we're giving that to them when we could utilize that for other
Sure.
expenditures?
There will be a section in the application where you have to provide a narrative on what your funding will go to, whether it's a salary, whether it's certain kind of programming whether it's capital improvement costs, and this non-departmental compliance person that I hope the council approves will be able to follow this over the next year. So when you have the 2026 budget, you can go back and say, hey, you did everything you said you were gonna do. Great. Here's your money for 2026.
Makes me feel a little better. Thank you.
Counselor President Aliff.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the report. So I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to argue from years ago. Okay, because I think it's pertinent today. The big question has to be, and I appreciate the fact that you put the slide up that says that there's a mayor responsibility. We had a city manager at one time, the city manager, finance director responsibility, and city council responsibility. And I appreciate the way that you spelled it out and everything like that. But the big question has to be, literally, I can't find one that doesn't do it. Literally every city council in the country, in the United States, starts the budget process with the administration, with the executive branch in February. You make statements like department heads present to the mayor, the finance director, and the chief of staff, but they don't present to city council. And so here's what happens, and here's where the disconnect is between the administration, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. Come October, this is in the past. I'm not assuming that this is going to happen this year, but it sounds like it is. In the past, we were given a budget in October, a detailed comprehensive budget of $130 million to city council, and city council's only real responsibility is how the city spends its money. And you expect 7 city councilors with no financial background, literally many people who've never been in business, never looked at comprehensive financial plans, anything else like that, are going to make a decision on a budget without being included in the process. And that's the way it's happened over and over again. And the way that the administrations have always in the past kept city council quiet was they give them a binder about that thick with non-departmental expenses. And they would say to city council, this is what we're recommending. You go ahead and look at this and tell us how you want to spend the money. So we take 1 page of the budget, give it to city council and say, here's what you guys have control over. And city council would buy into that and say, well, we want to give this much money to so-and-so. We want to give this much money to so-and-so. And the other 185 pages or 900 pages were literally not even considered. And then we spend the next year or the following year wondering why these expenses are this way, why this is happening a certain way, because we were never included in the process. I suggest, and I was hoping and with the work session chair that we were going to change that. We were going to have a paradigm shift in the way that we function with city council in including them in the budget process of understanding exactly where the numbers are coming from, exactly why the requests that are being made for specific reasons, and so on and so forth. I hope that can happen because I think it needs to happen. Again, I think you can research it and you'd be hard pressed to find another community in the United States that does their budget process the way that we do our budget process. The other thing that's very concerning is the non-departmental requests as it's put up here on the screen tonight. So even though the function of municipal government is literally to do certain things, we're going to put out for the first time ever, I guess, a open invitation for every nonprofit in in the city of Pueblo to apply to the city for funds. We're literally opening the door and say, hey, if you want money, just forget CSAC. Even though we have CSAC, and that's the process that we use to fund nonprofits, we're going to throw that out the door and we're not going to utilize that process. What we're going to do is we're going to bring it in-house. And now city council and the mayor and finance is going to vet all the nonprofits. We're going to make them all line items on the budget. What happens if city council doesn't want nonprofits as a line item? What happens if city council says we're not going to fund nonprofits in that way? We have CSAC, the way that it was set up. If we need to fund CSAC with more money, then let's fund CSAC with more money. But why are you bringing it back to the city and opening it up citywide? That just doesn't make sense. But if we don't have these conversations of how city council feels come November, when you want them to approve a budget and they say, well, we're not going to approve this with, could we theoretically go to January with no approved budget? Yeah, we can. If we don't approve a budget, we shut the city down. It's literally the only thing city council controls. Is that correct?
Yes, if the budget isn't passed, there
Then
would
the
be
city
no
shuts down.
funding
So
for
we
it.
should be included in that process is all I'm saying on that. And then when I looked at the one of the opening statements of where we showed the expenses from 2020, was it, to 2024? You know, you mentioned that one thing was the highest, but we didn't mention that wages were up $17.4 million in that period of time. And operating costs were actually up 5.2 million. So that's a 22.6 million increase. And that's literally, if you look at the numbers in the last 2 years, it's gained that much. Because I think wages were at 44 million for 2 or 3 years. I don't have it in front of me. And then all of a sudden, 2 years ago, they jumped, then they jumped again. And I wonder if that has anything to do with our deficiency other than the 7.5 million in the Tabor refunds. I don't know. But again, that's something we should all be involved in and something we should all be talking about. So I like the fact that we're having this discussion. I like the fact that we're coming to the table with conversation and ideas and things like that. But what I'd like to see more specific is are we going to cut 10% out of this? We were $13 million in the hole in 2024. Are we going to cut 10% out of the budget? Are we going to cut 20%? What's our goal? Where do we plan on being in 2025? In the next 10 years, where do we plan on being based on whatever numbers that are there? And it's really encouraging how the things that you guys are going to look at to try and free up money and make it more readable. But I think we need to be more specific. And I think city council has an idea on what they think we should do. Obviously, I don't think anybody up here wants to be $13 million in the hole or $1 million in the hole. We should have surplus and be saving money so we can spend it on the things that the community expects us to spend it on. So
I will say, just to give a response to that I do have a budget that goes through 2036, and this is one of the things that we are looking at. And so that's when I'm describing us looking at those line items and seeing which ones we can reduce. Then we can come back and say to council, we have already reduced the budget by X amount, which is this percentage with items X, Y, Z, and explain those. So that is our first step, is that we want to look at that internally because we know there's some spots that we can identify that can cut major dollars out that we know isn't going to be a hindrance on what we're able to provide for the community. So that is step one. And yes, I do have something planned out because it is a concern. We want to make sure that what we're planning for tomorrow and the next year, how that flows through all the way 10 years out.
Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, President Aliff brought up the term, CSAC, excuse me, that's Community Service Advisory Commission, all right, on that. And I had gotten a call, and again, I try to follow through with my constituents, and one of them happened to be a board member. And his concern was how diluted his vote gets when he's sitting up there with 16 members, which makes kind of sense if you think about it. But so what was really troublesome to him is that when he asked questions about the operating costs, and from my understand, the operating costs also can entangle the salaries for CEOs and staff, is that correct? And he said what happens is when it comes by him and he's saying, wait, let's get more definitive on those salaries for CEOs. Let's get more definitive on staff. He could never get the answers that he wanted. And then the combination of all the other votes outvoted him, and the recommendation then came to council, which is kind of, I think, a relief for us knowing that we have somebody that's vetting, but are they vetting properly? That's my concern. And from what he's telling me, no, they're not. So I think at one time, CSAC, when that was started, and again, I don't know how long ago that was, maybe somebody can, I don't know if anybody knows how long they've been going at it, but CSAC, if they're doing their job correctly, I want to know if they're doing it correctly, and how do we go farther to have them, or do we have somebody on council that's sitting on CSAC? No, on council, there's no council member on CSAC. That might be something we could look at. Okay, just want to throw that out.
Okay, Counselor Flores.
You know, I'm looking at the city charter right here, and at some point we're probably going to need our city attorney to look at this, but whether this was changed, I don't think this was changed much, but it says duties of the mayor, and duties of the mayor. It's pretty clear. Let me just read it. It's short. I lost my spot here. Well, to make it short is that the mayor is basically responsible for the budget, both in formulating it and also making sure that it's followed during the term, the annual term. But the question is that the initial power and maybe the dates that we're talking about here really is the responsibility of the mayor and your department. And at some point that needs to be clarified. The line needs to be clarified. Obviously, you present everything that you put together to us, and we're allowed to make some modifications, but the ultimate responsibility of the budget is really the mayor, according to our city charter. And whether that was amended when the mayor got elected or it read the same way with the city manager, I mean, I don't have it to compare here, but it's pretty clear that responsibility is yours. But I digress now. I wanted to ask you, is there any way of determining how much of a savings we have on an annual basis and going forward as to positions that aren't filled? If we haven't filled 50 police slots, we haven't spent that money, but nowhere do you know what that number is. And so when people say that we're operating in a deficit, we need to have a clear picture, okay, of what that means. Now, in a perfect world, all 50 slots would be filled, and because we budget for that. And in a perfect world, there's probably, I've heard numbers as high as 70 of other positions in the city that cannot be filled. So that's a big number, and I don't know whether or not that would be of value as we move forward.
Yeah, and that is something that the mayor and I have spoken about, looking at some of those positions that have been funded but not filled and removing those positions, because if we're not going to fill them, we shouldn't be budgeting for them.
Well, and obviously like the chief, he doesn't want to lose those slots, so we don't.
Right,
don't
and
wanna-
so
and I
this
wouldn't
is
want him
looking
to.
at some other departments as well.
Right.
So there's a couple of seats within other departments that have gone unfilled for a number of years. And so we're going to be evaluating those positions.
Right. And then, not that I'm going either way, but the situation with the Chamber of Commerce, this has been in place since probably 1992, in which they somehow have access to the fee that's collected in the motels. And that's how that's been funded for, I don't know, the last 30 years. And you're saying that there's no contractual figures. I mean, obviously you have to get that number from the, what is it called? The vendor, not the
So
vendor fee.
it's the lodging.
The lodging tax, right? So we don't want to mix apples and oranges here.
Mhm.
That's kind of a unique situation because they did all the tourist marketing. In fact, their magazine just came out. I just saw it. So but one last question, and it had to do with this slot. Back in 2021, I wanted to have an internal auditor. An internal auditor would have, as part of their duties, what you're asking this nonprofit person to do. But remember, we give out more money to profit motivated businesses through our half-cent sales tax. Are they meeting their obligation? And are we getting the number of jobs that they say they're going to give us? So this is a much broader question, and I know we're going to have a chance to discuss this at some point. But I really feel that a position like that is needed. But I see what you want to do with the nonprofits as being part of an internal auditor. And we can have that discussion later, but I know that that's going to be an important position for the mayor. And I want to help in making sure that we do it the right way. So thank you.
Counselor Martinez, do you have anything to say?
No, I think I really appreciate, I've already gotten, I guess, some questions just from community members about the timeline. So the timeline is really helpful. My only question is for the contracts, so like the zoo and the art center and all those folks, are they going to be filling out that same Colorado grants application, or is it just going to be for those non-departmentals?
Everybody's gonna have to fill it out.
Okay. And I really like the idea of taking an inventory and a stock first. I think that's really smart and strategic, and I have full faith in the administration when we see it in October.
I just wanted to clarify too, we're not just gonna be sending letters out to every nonprofit in the city of Pueblo to try to get funds from the city. They'll go out to the ones that they've gone out to before. And as far as the budgetary duties per the charter, I don't mind listening to what council wants to see and, what their questions are. I know that as a counselor, it was hard, going over everything, especially as a new counselor in those short 2 weeks or a couple council meetings that we had. And when you get a booklet like this, like President Aliff says, you don't really know what attributes to wages or what attributes to operating costs. And so I'm happy to have those conversations with the council and the departments that the council sees fit to have them to. I would just ask Councilor Maestri that you push this back until the departments start to come and formulate their budgets, because as of your dates of June 3rd, that wouldn't have happened yet. So in order to give the departments time, my office time, finance time to look over and make sure we're seeing it firsthand and then come to the council, I'm completely fine with, listening to your questions, concerns, but just because it's, farther down in July, I don't think the June date is appropriate because nobody is going to have that ready because it's not.
Yeah, that came from the request from other council members. And I don't know that they're looking for bottom line dollars. but just to understand what their needs are and how they're moving forward, how they need to move forward next year with the budget. So I'll discuss that with the other council members that had requested it,
Okay.
and we'll see how we do. I think the expectation was not the bottom dollar.
Okay. I mean,
Mhm.
any dollar at all though, just because that they're not going to be prepared for that. You know, it's not per the charter, not the council's responsibility. But again, happy to have those questions, but that time frame is not, that's not going to be sufficient for them to get those in orders because they're not even going to be looking to what those budgets looks like in July, August, September even. So I would just ask that if you're going to do that, to push it back so that they have the time to make sure that they're giving you all the information and have what you need. And if there's a special form with questions about operating or wages or, you know, whatever the council would like to ask, I would ask that each department was able to come up with those specifics for you beforehand.
Mhm. Okay, we'll take that into
Yeah,
consideration.
just for consideration, so you get the best information as it's happening.
Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, just clarification for me. I'm not picking on the chamber. That's something I'd read in the budget. But how is it $900,000 established for that if they don't give you all the information that's you're looking at to figure out, maybe it should be 750,000, maybe it should be $1.5 million. How did that happen? How did we come up with $900 and something thousand if you don't get the full transparency, the picture? How do you do that?
Good question.
Every time I've been involved, they've made a request. We've gotten the packet and it's full of all of the information, and they make the request of the money. And as Counselor Flores said, it's come out of the lodger's tax like it does in many communities. And they only get a portion of it. They don't get all of the lodger's tax. Most chambers get all of the lodger's tax, and we have cut them back for years and years and years. But when you get to that part, they'll give you a whole request packet that gives you the information you're seeking.
So they're being transparent is what you're telling me?
I've always known them to be transparent.
They all are different. Everybody that comes and the lodger's tax isn't allocated for any certain entity. All $1.7 million is dumped right back into the general fund, and it's used across the board for several different things.
Maybe there's some confusion because I don't know if there's ever been an expectation set for the chamber, which it should be a contractual agreement, because they are providing us with a service, correct? With a marketing service. And since, but it's never been defined.
Right.
And maybe that's how we should look at it moving forward, as them as a consultant, marketing firm that's marketing Pueblo, rather than no expectations. Hey, really, there isn't.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think that's how it needs to be looked at. And if the council doesn't feel, or the city doesn't feel like they're offering the service, then put it out for a marketing firm that's going to market Pueblo. But I think that's just the way to put a kibosh on all of what people think the chamber should be doing and what their obligations are, and more setting an expectation for what they're going to provide us as our marketing service. So maybe that's something to think about. The other thing too is, Alex, I was going over the previous meetings, and last year when we were talking about the road money, because there was a big controversy of where's all the funds, how much funds there were, because there was such a holdout on the amount of TABOR that we received for 2021. We found out after we did the 2022 budget that it was $17 million. And, but last year they said, oh, well, we spent 10 in 2022 and then the 7 and remaining funds for the for 2023, or 2022 for 2023, and then the remaining 7 for 2024. But now you're telling me this is 2024-7 and then there's another 10. Why is it coming to that? Why are you saying it like that now?
It's because you
See.
get 2.5 million in highway user tax. So that's
Correct.
where the other money comes from. So
Correct. I got that part, but what was explained to us for the 2023 budget was 10 of the Tabor revenue was used. And for 2024, we had another 7.5 million plus 2.5 million. But today you're telling us 7.5 million for 2024 and 7.5 million for 2025. So which is it?
Is 7.5 million for 23 and 24. And I can only speak since I was not part of that budget process for the 23 budget. I can
Mhm.
only speak definitely for the 24, but our financial records and what's within the budget that we
Mhm.
look at for the CIP, it does show the 7.5 was street rehab out of the general fund in 23, and then the 2.5 from the highway user tax
Correct.
fund for 23 and 24 to
Because
combine to
the
that 10.
Tabor refund went to the general fund.
Correct.
And so it came out for 2022's budget and 23's budget and 24's budget.
Mhm.
But you're listing it today as another 7.5 million of Tabor going to 25.
No, just two. It's just the remaining it is 2.268 million will go towards the 2025 budget. That's the remaining amount.
Okay. And then also, so for example, when you say you're going to cut the departments, the monies that we don't use, in 2022, we projected the 2023 budget to have about a $16.5 million overage, but it only ended up to be 10 million, 346,000. So really, when you're cutting those, that means the money, we didn't spend a lot of the money on those positions. And that's the money that you're going to be looking to cut again. So that's going to be about 7 million.
No.
Are you saying?
So what it was is the 2023 budget, we had budgeted, I think it was into fund balance in 16.9. And
Mhm.
so with all the different activities, with the revenue and the different expenditures, that
Mhm.
did reduce to what we estimate to be 10.3. But without going and looking at the specific details, I wouldn't be able to say exactly what caused the increase and decrease. I could do that information,
But
but
if you
not
didn't,
just
if you
looking over
didn't
it.
use a position, when you came to this number, that position that wasn't filled would have caused the decrease from the 16.9 to the 10.
Yes, that would be some of it, but there's going to be other items that are going
Okay.
to make up that difference. But yes, if you have a position that was budgeted and you did not fill it, you would not have that expenditure as part of the estimated expenditures for the year.
Okay. And then when you did come to the retreat, Mayor, you did say that you were looking for an auditor to audit the ARPA funding and how the ARPA funding was expended, and then how it was going to be paid for out of ARPA dollars. But this is a different request that you're making.
yeah, so I thought it would be better used to be use funding that's already been provided to my office, the
Mhm.
internal auditor position. So I took that position, which I could talk a little bit more about on the 13th, and took that position, changed it to a non-departmental compliance position, so they can they'll also be able to do ARPA. We're coming down to the end of the ARPA, so there's not going to be a whole lot of ARPA to do other than the outstanding contracts that are still going, and we've been working on what that'll look like through 2026. And then there will be still some remainders of the funds. And so if you saw on the agenda for next Monday, you'll see it also a marketing specialist. So right now in my office, I have a part-time marketing and social media specialist that's been budgeted for the last couple of years. We've not been able to fill it because it's part-time. So I'm asking the council to take that other portion of the internal auditor salary that's already allocated in my office and make the part-time position a full-time position. So essentially I'm getting 2 full-time people for the price of one.
What is your, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. let me go to Counselor Hernandez and let him go while I kind of remembered my question.
Okay.
And,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with all the comments that my previous colleagues have said already, or my colleagues have stated previously, so try not to be redundant. I'm an optimist perspective. I have an optimist perspective, but I don't have optimism that you're going to go line through line in the budget and find out where things were over budgeted, because that just naturally didn't happen overall since 2018 up into 2024, the budget has increased 35–40%. Okay, systematically across the board. So to Counselor Maestri, help me make sure I don't miss.
You're good.
Thank you. That at the end of every budget year, it's what salary savings have really helped the city. And that's been perpetual every year. And I recall sitting in the finance seat, Counselor Aliff making that direct point, give us to the previous mayor, give us a real budget, if you remember saying that. So what the expectation is kind of similar to how the process has worked. It's not a characterization on you all, but that's just the way it's worked. And I have full understanding and empathy of when you're trying to change a budget process. Budget process is either bottom up or top down. So at the end of it, that we're faced with at the end in October with a budget that you've gone through to wrangle through, go through department directors, sift it through, okay, and then we're presented a budget to deal with. What I'll be left to do is say, okay, you just have to reduce it by 10%. Because we were not able to be in that budget process. That's just the end of it. I'm not telegraphing that that's where it would be. But if I just look at 2023's budget cycle of how you got to 2024, if I look at sales tax through 2023 of how you got to the appropriated 2024, and you've only had 2 months, I believe, or 3 months. January was 10% down and February buoyed back up. But just a presumption that if 2024 looks no different than 2023, but your department needs, operating expense and labor have gone up, you're going to be more than 10 million in the hole again. That's just pretty simple math from my perspective. Now, how it'll turn out, hopefully better, but the economic conditions don't look that way today with me overall. Okay, but that's my optics. Maybe there'll be something different that happens from now until mid-June or July for our sales tax, which is 70% of the budget. In the meantime, your department director is going to be coming forward and say, we need more, we need more, we need more. That's just the nature of how it's going. So I'm not optimistic that you're going to be to a balanced budget perspective. And that was a question that was asked to me when I sat in that seat and interviewed for this job. And the reason I thought I got this job out of 36 candidates was because of my financial perspective and capability. And one of the questions I answered was my financial perspective is accountability and fiscal accountability, meaning a balanced budget, which is really, really, really hard to do. I understand that. But at the same time, hard decisions will have to be made if you can't get there. If the runway reflects of what I've said, I'm not a foreseer, but I just look at the past as history as where we're at today. And knowing that, anyway, that'll stop my question. Let me just add to the non-department process, which I did that and you would have to do that. It's an arduous process to the 3-ring binder of getting all the applications for the need that you'll send out. A tough process. It really is. It's almost a full-time job beyond a 10-hour day job. And that's a tough process to sift that through. My concern about this nonprofit coordinator is I don't see to where it has the audit type skills. And even if it does have the audit type skills, when I looked at the financial statements for all the nonprofits, so what? I looked at them and guess what? They were usually 2 years old because they're trying to finish 2023's audit. And you won't even have that yet by the time the package comes. It's going to be a year and almost 2 years dated. So what good is the information going to be? It really is. That's the way it's just going to turn out. My last comment on the Chamber of Commerce, I clearly remember, and he can prove me that my memory's gone south, but I clearly remember that when the Chamber of Commerce submitted their budget need, part of their package had a formula regarding lodging tax, because they were really focused in needing that information from sales tax to understand how much lodging revenues had come in, so that the formula was what drove the budget for $500,000, 600,000, 750,000. And then 3 years ago, a previous counselor was, there was a marketing discussion. There was a lot of debate about that. So I believe what happened was then, now that the budget, I believe, is 900,000, give or take, and 50,000 is for marketing, specifically for the marketing efforts, if you will. I just add that to the record as to, but I looked at their budget recently at some point. I think the Chamber's budget is about $2.3 million. So getting back to the 900,000 that's provided from the city, whatever they do, the Chili Fest, their overall budget is it's 2.3 million. And whatever comes from the Chili Fest, which is separate and distinct, we have, as far as I know, we have no activity or engagement in that. It's entirely what they do on their own, other than we give a approval for them to block off the streets and all that. But other than that, we don't have any involvement in that. So thank you.
My question is, when I look at the summary report last year for the 2024 budget, can you tell me where specifically a line item is for the Tabor revenue? Because if it went into the fund balance in 2021, it said that we were 15,485.33 over. So where within the 2021 budget is the line item showing the 17 million?
There is no line item, so it is just a calculation that we do to see how much revenue we would be able to keep if we were not de-Bruced. Since we're de-Bruced, we don't have to give that money back. So it's a formula that we do after we have the audited financial statement. So it is not extra revenue. It's only a calculation.
Correct. And if it goes, so it's a calculation. So when they say that 15,400,000 and something thousand for 2021, we were actually, but we had to give of that money for 2021. In addition, we had to give 17 million back towards roads out of that. So we didn't really, I mean, that 15 million was actually designated towards or earmarked towards roads, correct? Because that's what the tax was for.
No, that would not be correct. So what we do is we look at the different revenues, we pull out the ones that aren't involved in the Tabor calculation, and then we make that calculation. We see what the amount would be to give back, but it's not dollar for dollar looking at what the increase or decrease in fund balance would be.
So it's already in there, and you are still 15 million over. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So it's already in the above line items.
Yes.
Okay, so my question was, with this nonprofit invitation, are we getting rid of CSAC? And if we bring the nonprofits forward and are giving them money, what is your amount that you feel that you're going to, I mean, you're going to have a cutoff at some
Yeah,
point.
no, I don't want to get rid of CSAC. I just don't want to dual fund either. So if there's CSAC money, city shouldn't be dually funding. They should either get it from CSAC or they should get it from the city.
So what you're saying is that you're not going to duplicate who you're going to give the money to. What is your budget that you're setting for yourself with all these applications that are coming forward?
I don't necessarily have a budget yet. If you look in the non-departmentals, I don't know how many of you have one of these in front of you. But 5.2 million of it is contractual or city-owned properties or some form of contractual. Only 1.4 million is to straight non-departmentals that don't have contractions in the city. So I think it's less than 1% of the city's total budget go to nonprofits or non-departmental. These range all.
Well, that's increased throughout the years.
So
are you
in
setting
2021, it was 1.1 million, and in 2024, it went to 1.4.
Mhm.
The highest the highest ask on here is the art center at 300,000, followed up by the YMCA at 200,000. Everything else is pretty minuscule. There's not a certain dollar amount that I'm looking at. I'm looking at what their asks are gonna be, but also if they're even able to fill out the application and provide the financials to back up what the city's been giving them previously.
Mhm. But you still have to set yourself a dollar amount, right? I mean, like CSAC is
So
has their dollar
essentially what
amount.
happens, you know, when I reviewed some of the letters that have gone out previously, it says don't increase your asks from the previous budget. So we'll stick to that. So there's not an increase ask. See how many of these non-departmentals can even get through the application process, if they even have all the documentations, like Mr. Hernandez said, to be providing to us.
Mhm.
If they have good governance, if their mission statement aligns with things that I know the city council would like to see money going
Mhm.
to, because I know
Mhm.
that there's some of you that support some of these very nonprofits that are on. Some of these are, they do great work in your district. And then, you know, some of them we're not sure, and it's not tangible items that we can see. So I think it's important to review them, their message, review how they're governing, look at their financials, see if they're duplicating services.
I
and-
understand
and
all
go
that,
off that.
Mayor, but what I'm saying is.
There's not a dollar amount I'm looking for.
There's not, and I'm not saying from the nonprofits, I'm saying from your budget to the nonprofits. You may come up with a $2.5 million worth of people that, you know, of approvals that you want to give. What are you planning on? What is your dollar amount
The ask is gonna be no greater than it was in 2024.
for 1.4 million?
Yeah, to each one, so they each receive a letter saying essentially, do not ask more than you asked for in the previous year.
No,
could do the
what
previous
if their
5 years,
ask
you could
was
do an
for like a
average.
capital improvement with their nonprofit, like.
I'm sorry?
What if their ask was for a capital improvement on their project that's already completed? Why would they be asking
Well,
again?
then that's not something that we would fund.
I mean, would you consider the same amount? Would you
I wouldn't
consider?
consider funding something
Are
that's
you
already
con-
been funded.
No, I'm talking about for a different project, but for the same amount. You know, maybe it's drive a parking lot one time and it's a pool the next time. But you know, it's all the same amount coming from a nonprofit.
I think that
Are you going to be is this the same nonprofits every year? And why wouldn't it be nonprofits throughout the community and not just the same people that come every year and have an ask?
So we're gonna send letters to all the ones that we normally send letters to. I can't tell you if those have all been funded or not. I'm not sure what the previous administration did, how many letters have gone out. Maybe President Aliff could speak to that, because you brought that, you brought that up about us just opening up to not all non-departmentals and nonprofits. I'm not sure how. I only see what came back before as a city councilor, as you saw. I don't know if there was other asks previously. I don't know if the letter went out to everybody. Mr. Hernandez would probably know if throughout years the letters went out to everybody, but my administration is going to send the letters out to the ones that we funded last year.
Okay. Any more questions from council? Counselor Aliff.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked a lot, but I would like to ask each and every city councilor, if that's okay with you, what their expectations of the budget should be at the end of the year. When we go through this process, as a city councilor, are you looking for it to stay the same, to be reduced, to what are you looking for? So at least we've communicated to the administration what our expectations are when it comes to that.
Okay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think my goal would be a minimum 15% decrease in the budget.
Counselor Latino,
I would like to see a decrease as well.
Counselor Hernandez.
When I answered your question, when I interviewed, I answered a balanced budget.
Mhm,
And what does that take to do that?
mhm,
We don't know yet.
mhm. Counselor Flores.
I agree with Mr. Hernandez. We need to look at a balanced budget. A 50% decrease, are we talking about laying people off here?
15%.
15%, yeah.
Mhm.
We would cut into payroll here.
How do we know that? We're not
It's-
included. So see, here's this is the whole purpose of the discussion. How would we know what we have to do? Because we're not included in the discussion. So we haven't delved through each and every line of the budget to say, or heard presentations or understand, I mean, can operating costs be cut 10, 15%? What kind of what does that do to the budget? There's tons of areas where you can look in the budget and say, the areas they're looking at, how much will that cut out of the budget? It's probably unrealistic to say, and again, this is just my opinion, that we continually need to grow government and not reduce the size of our government. Once again, I'll go back to numbers. You have a community that has been stagnant in growth for 50 years. And let's just take the last 5 or 10 years, stagnant in growth, but yet our expenses have grown 40-some%. What's the total, Councilor Hernandez?
What do you mean? The total budget, let's say it's 135 million.
What's it grown?
It's grown 35, 40%.
40%. So you have a 40% growth in government with no growth in the size of your community. And I'm sure that the community would argue that the services that we provide, such as good roads, good sewers and good wastewater and all of these other things aren't being taken care of. So, you know, I think we need to look at that. That's all I'm saying.
I think when you talk about growth in the budget, I think it's important to remember where that growth came from and where it's been spent over the last 3 years. We talk about the Tabor funds that the city kept in, which grew the budget $17 million essentially, and all $17 million has been spent on roads to this point. So I think what's going to be really realistic is for the council, the mayor, the finance department to come up with a baseline of what an actual budget looks like and what that looks like moving forward. We are never going to have years again like we had 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 because of federal stimulus money coming back into the city of Pueblo. Almost every citizen receives an additional $6,000 over a few months that they went and bought cars and bought houses. And now we're not seeing those increases. That's why you're seeing sales tax continue to drop every single month. Mr. Hernandez, you're shaking your head. You know what I'm talking about when we talk about growing the budget. The budget grew, the money has been expanded the way that the citizens voted for it to be spent. It went to roads, but that money is no longer there. So a realistic number is 133 minus 17 million in Tabor funds that we took in. That's what a realistic number looks like. And we're going to do everything that we can to get back to that point. But I think when we start talking about cutting our operating costs and cutting our staff 15%, I don't think that that's doable if you want to see Pueblo continue to grow, us to be able to upkeep our roads, upkeep our parks, upkeep our public safety. That's just the world that we live in right now. Everything is expensive and we have to pay our employees well. We're not going to be able to keep employees. So please keep that in mind. When you talk about cutting the budget 10 to 15%, you need to realize how the budget grew so much over the last 3 or 4 years. It's not because we just went out and gave everybody huge raises or we hired all these employees. It's because the federal government put, so much money. Even when you look at the ARPA funds, the city of Pueblo, we put $36 million back into the community that was, probably respent on cars and purchases and houses and jobs. And so we need to think about how we got to this position and what a baseline budget is actually going to look at. It's not $133 million. That's far-fetched. I think 17, 20 less than that. I think that's a good baseline. And I think without COVID, that's where we would probably be there.
Well, literally expenses grew at the rate that revenue did. So expenses grew. Okay. So that's why wages are up $17 million in 3 years. And that's why operating expenses are up $5.2 million in 3 years, is because we paved some roads.
Paved roads. We gave raises.
Okay.
We've had how many times have we done contracts now in the last 4 years? The city council
One of the
approved the fire department a 7.7% raise increase last year. Not saying that people don't deserve it, but I think that we need to make sure that we have a good baseline in order to continue. That's what I'm saying.
I agree.
Counselor Martinez.
I don't feel comfortable at all answering this question, not knowing what staff direction is. I don't know what the needs of the departments are. I have full faith in staff to come up with a budget, and I don't feel comfortable saying, "Oh, well, this is my vision," because I'm not the subject matter expert. The department directors are of all of their departments, so I don't feel comfortable with that. I echo what Mayor Graham is saying about we can't grow as a city if we're going to be reducing staff. I mean, look at we're overwhelming our city law office, our attorney's office, because of how many different ordinances and things that need to be passed. It's like they need more help. Look at the nonprofit coordinator. I mean, I heard tonight several counselors saying that they were not going to be supportive of that, and when in actuality, that's a needed position. The same thing with the media marketing. There's one FTE right now dedicated to marketing for the whole city. That should be a whole team. So when we're talking about growth and we're talking about having an efficient and effective running city, a part of that is having a very strong and full force workforce. So that needs to be reflected in the budget, and I have full faith in our city department directors who do this day ins and day outs with recommending what we need to be spending on the budget, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, I'm just curious if maybe we went through the ARPA funds a little faster than we should have. Maybe it's me, I don't know. But I am in agreement that a balanced budget should be the target we should be looking at in almost any budget. And I kind of applaud some of the things I'm hearing tonight. Maybe we're going to move in that direction finally, but God, it took a longer time to get to this.
All right. I would like to see a balanced budget. I would like to, see us, we took some hits. We have promised to continue to do road improvements, whether we have Tabor or not. That's what the citizens are expecting, and I'm hoping that that comes back into the budget and we can serve the community by giving them roads and making the needs of the city a priority over some of the other non-departmentals and nonprofits. So,
Right.
okay.
Mr. Gomez.
I just wanted to make one quick comment for the record, and that is, if you look at, there's 9 cities our size in Colorado, between 110,000 population to 130. If you put Pueblo next to these other 8 cities, we are the most frugal, the most efficient city of our size in the state of Colorado. When you have Boulder, Colorado, which is the highest, their budget is about 350 million. We're talking 133 here. And you look at Westminster and you look at Centennial, they're all in the $200,000 range. So I just want to go on record that we do a lot in the city of Pueblo with what we have, and we don't have a lot when you compare us to other communities in the state of Colorado. I don't know how much more frugal we can be, but I am, I'm on board that we should have a balanced budget. I don't think anyone, and I don't know why we're talking about past councils. Nothing, that we've always maintained, a balance of our budget every year. So it'll be interesting going forward. Thank you.
Yes, you're right, Counselor Flores. Those communities are 3 times more there, but that they get the revenue to cover that.
I'm talking about population.
Well, it does. Dollars are what pays. The dollars are what keeps it going, but their revenue that they generate through that population, they're generating way more revenue through that. We work with what we got. That's what our revenue is. It's 1/3 of what everyone else's is.
Pueblo's gone from being the 2nd largest city to being the 8th or 9th largest city in the state. And again, folks, we have people in this community that can't afford higher taxes, whether it's at the grocery store or whether it's at the state level, the city level, the county level, or the federal level. Okay? We need to be concerned about these particular people, and there's thousands of them. We're amongst the poorest cities and counties in the state of Colorado. Believe me, I know I've lived in other places in this state that are bigger than Pueblo. And I've dealt with government kinds of things in those particular counties and communities. So we need to be concerned about our people here and what they can afford and what they can't afford. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Counselor Hernandez.
Last comment, thank you. Here's a perspective, not an advice or recommendation. But in 2021, what I recall, what I had was around 150 million in investments, particularly mainly with Colorado Trust. There were several entities that the city had investments with, and I consolidated them down to 2 or 3 because wasn't it unmanageable, but you all learn about the same investment rate of returns. So I consolidated many of them. But the point being is you have this big nest egg, if you will. I don't know what the number is today. If you know what the number is now, just off the top, but that may be, and I don't need a number right now, but I certainly want an update on what that number is. Because if you look at that, of how over the years that's been built up, and that is pretty big sizable investment portfolio, that may be a segue in order to chip away some really big things that we have here in order for the mayor to reset the budget, okay? And figure out what that is, take a chunk out of whatever, take a bite out of that cookie jar, whatever it is, in order to move forward, to me is the way that I would look to proceed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, it's 8:12 PM and we are adjourned.